Hey, Richard Bryce here, Tennis Hacker. Today, we're going to be working on footwork patterns for the deep one-handed backhand. If you've got a single-handed backhand, you know how challenging these balls can be. Your opponent hits it deep. If they hit it heavy onto your backhand, it can be really tricky to deal with. Now, if you've got amazing timing, yes, you can step in, you can take it early, and you can take it on the rise, but that is a real low percentage shot for a lot of people. So much of the time, you're going to need to move back, and there are very specific footwork patterns that you can use to increase your likelihood of playing a good quality of shot. So we've got a few different options, but we're going to be breaking them down very quickly, looking at the split step. Then we've got the first step, we've got the movement to the ball, and then we've got the contact footwork. So that is the precise way that you use your feet as you're making contact with the ball. I hope you find this video helpful. If you do, it'd be awesome if you could give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Okay, so let's start with the movement to the ball. This is going to be consisting of three things. We've got the split step, we've got the first step, and then we've got the actual movement itself. But they're all going to be really important because getting back early for these deep backhands is really the key to making it work. So we've got to start with our split step. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I've got another video that goes into detail about the split step. But the wider, the better. So we need to get wide and we need to go low, obviously depending on your level of flexibility and your level of leg strength. But going wide and low is what allows us to push off quickly. And as I'm sure you know, we are much slower moving back than we are moving forward. So we need to gain every advantage that we can to get back into position quickly so that we can hit a better quality of shot. So split step, wide and low, hopefully timing it roughly around when your opponent makes contact with the ball. There are certain things that can affect when that's going to be, but roughly at the time they make contact. Then we've got the first step. So the first step is kind of a combination movement. As a right-hander, I would be pushing off my right leg. So I'm pushing, pivoting and opening out. And with my left leg, I'm actually going to be dropping my foot underneath. So this isn't something that I can demonstrate in slow motion because of gravity, it just doesn't work. But it would look like that, moving more in real speed. So I'm pushing off the right leg as I open up, but then I'm effectively pulling my hip or pulling my foot underneath my hip, underneath my body, because that's what allows me to drive into the ground and create speed. So split step, pivot, plant the foot underneath and drive back. Now, one of the really important pieces when you do this is obviously you're going to be getting your unit turn with your upper body. So this video is about footwork, but we need to get back there. We need to be ready to hit our shot. So as you do this, you've got to get that unit turn. And this is where so many people go wrong. They go back, the racket isn't ready in position, so then they can't hit the shot anyway. So it's first step with the unit turn together. And then hopefully what you can see with my footwork is I'm using crossover steps. So a crossover step being something that looks like this, where my leg is crossing over in front of the other one. So right leg crossing over in front of left. Now, depending on the type of ball, exactly what's going on with the ball, you might need to use some shuffle steps. So when your opponent hits it, you might not know exactly where it's going. So it's a case of driving off, getting the footwork done early, and then maybe you have a couple of shuffle steps. You might be stepping into the ball afterwards, you might be stepping back further, but it's generally crossover steps to get the fast movement to the ball. Notice how low I stay when I'm doing that. If I'm close and upright, it's harder to do it. So we're going to be there. And that's what the movement looks like. And it's just something you want to practice over and over again. You can be out on court, you can do it at home in your front room, landing from that split step, unit turn as you pivot, and then doing the crossover steps. So that's what the footwork looks like. Now, like I mentioned a moment ago, one of the keys to this is going to be the ball recognition. The earlier you can recognize where the ball's going, the better you can get set up. A lot of that comes down to visual processing, and that's something that I work with players a lot on. But I've created a free Tennis Vision starter program for you to help to start working on your visual system, so hopefully you can read the ball sooner. If you haven't already got that, there should be a card appeared, or you can download it from the description below. But that is the footwork in terms of the movement to the ball. Okay, so now let's look at the contact footwork. So exactly what we're going to be doing with our feet as we hit the ball. And we've got 3/4 options, and the type of footwork that you use is really going to depend on the ball that you're receiving. The first option is where it's going to be slightly easier, it's going to be deep, it's going to be bouncing a little bit higher, so it's really difficult to kind of stay in position because you'll be taking it up there. Obviously some players can do it, but we're working on moving backwards. So we have time where we can move backwards, allow the ball to drop, and then step in and take the ball at a reasonable contact height. But it's about that initial footwork, so you'll get back in time, and then when you just have time, you can then step in and take it there. So that's option. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a look. Obviously, I'm playing left-handed here because I'm relearning to play left-handed, so that's why it looks different to the demos that I've just done. But there's the split step, crossover step to get to the ball, and then step in. And you know, this is a reasonable ball. It's not too deep, but it's one where I do have to step back on a little bit. If I was to stay still and try and take that, it'd be at least at shoulder height. So I'm stepping back, letting it drop, so it's a little bit lower. Most of the time, split step, crossover step, step in, but there are some occasions where the ball didn't go as far. Like there, I just did a little bit of a shuffle step. And that's what it looks like. Now, one kind of key thing I haven't really mentioned because it's about footwork is I'm always trying to keep my head still on contact. Obviously, that's going to be key to being consistent, so trying to keep my head still through contact as I hit the ball. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a look from the back. Again, split step, crossover step, and then step in. And what you can see is if you get this movement done early, you get back, it gives you a lot of time, and then you can actually hit a very reasonable shot. There's not too much pressure in the situation. It's much easier than trying to take this ball up high. But what we're going to see in a second, again, you know, we can go down the line off this option as well. If you're standing on the baseline trying to hit it at shoulder height, very tricky. But if you step back, give yourself time, get your footwork done early, you can go cross court or you can go down the line relatively comfortably. But it's all about that early preparation. Now, if you struggle with early preparation, I've made another video you should check out that goes into how to work on your preparation in a lot more detail. But now let's look at the next footwork variation. The next option that we've got is going to be a crossover slash shuffle step on contact, and that's why I said 3/4 options. This is where it's going to be probably a little bit more unfamiliar for most of you because you're basically loading and hitting off your outside leg. So as a right-handed player, you know, normally you're stepping in on that right foot, the front foot, but now what we're thinking about is loading off the outside leg and hitting off the outside leg. So I'm going to be loading off my left leg, hitting off my left leg, landing on my right leg. There's a slight variation. There's a crossover step where I'll be crossing over. So one leg crosses over in front of the other, and then there's a shuffle step where it's a similar feeling of movement, but my legs don't quite cross over. And again, depending on the type of ball you're receiving, it's going to be one of those two options. So if the ball is hit low and hard and deep, you're probably going to be using the shuffle step. It'll be an abbreviated swing. You won't have much time. It'll be something that looks like that. I'm not going to focus on that one for now because we're talking more about the high, deep balls, and that's where this crossover step is going to come in. So you'll be getting back, you'll be loading off that outside leg and crossing over as you hit it. Now, this is something that you might need to practice over and over again until the feeling becomes a little bit more natural for you. The best way to start is actually to just work on your open stance backhand, because you've got to have your unit turn and you've got to get the feeling of rotating forwards with that your left hip if you're a right-hander, so with your outside hip. As you rotate with the hip, the racket is going to be dropping, the torso is going to start to rotate, and then the contact is going to be out in front. So you've got to get the feeling of that. So ball's coming, drive off the outside leg with the hip, and rotate through. And you just want to get used to the feeling of that, because it's going to be a little bit weird. You've got to get used to the feeling, you've got to get used to the timing, but just do it over and over again. Once you've got the rough hang of it, then think about it in terms of the backwards movement. So we're moving back and get the feeling of that. So the contact point is going to be important. We're trying to contact the ball out in front. So as I step back into position, I drive off this back hip, racket drops, body rotates. The contact is going to be out in front as my leg crosses over. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Again, I'll switch over to my left hand and we'll take a little bit of a look at that. So let's take a look at some of these. This ball is set to be fairly deep, fairly aggressive. It's got a decent amount of spin on it. If I was to try and stand there and take that early, it would be extremely challenging. So I'm having to try and set off nice and early. Now the timing can be a little bit more difficult with a ball machine because you don't see them prepare, so timing your split step is harder. But it starts with that split step. Then we've got that drop step, the crossover step, and then using the crossover step on the contact point. So hitting there, making contact and landing on the same foot. Now I want to show you what it looks like in slow motion because it'll be easier for you to kind of see how it works. So I'm driving off my outside leg, dropping the racket head as I drive off my outside leg, rotating my body, and then landing on my front leg. Let's take a look at that again. Wide split step, low center of gravity, that drop step, so a big crossover step there to try and cover as much distance as I can. The racket is prepared early. Now I'm driving off my outside leg, driving my hip as I do the racket drop through contact. And again, really trying to keep my head still or as still as I can through contact. It's definitely one that you're going to have to get used to, but if you put a little bit of work on, practice it, get the feeling for it, it's going to make a real big difference and you're going to find it much easier on these high deep balls. The final option that we've got is going to be something called an outside hop. So these you're going to be using when the ball is just too heavy, too deep, you haven't got time to do anything else. It's going to be loading off the outside leg, so it's actually fairly similar to the crossover or the shuffle step. If you get the hang of those, this will be reasonable for you. This just involves a little bit more balance, but you'll be off that outside leg, landing on the outside leg. So as the ball comes to me, it'll look a little bit like that. So the feeling is the same. I'm rotating through that back hip and rotating my torso as I move. And on this one, I've got to mention briefly what the racket will be doing because it'll look a little bit different. So normally you're stepping in there, if you're hitting a topspin backhand, the finish might be something like that. Because I'm on the back foot, because of the angle of the body, because you're dealing with a higher ball, the finish might look a little bit different. It'll be an abbreviated swing where the racket kind of goes more directly upwards. So again, let's switch over. I'll switch over to my left hand and show you what it looks like for the outside hop. Okay, so I've set the ball machine kind of as deep and as heavy as I can where I can still hit the shot and not land in the back fence. So it really is quite a grisly feed. And as you can see, I'm still taking this ball at around shoulder height. So this is the footwork pattern for really deep, heavy balls where you just don't have time or space to do anything else. Let's take a look in slow motion. So wide split step, drop step. I did a little shuffle step there, but then crossover steps. That was just me judging the distance, but I'm loading off the outside leg, racket drop as the hip drives, and then I'm landing on the outside leg. Let's look at a couple more so you can see the timing, so you understand the early movement to the ball and what that looks like, but it's then loading off that outside leg, racket dropping into the slot position as you drive through the hip. On this one, I'm really having to get up and jump into the ball to maintain it at shoulder height. But again, that timing, you've got to play around with it. You've got to get used to the feeling of loading off that outside leg and landing off that outside leg. And again, I'm trying to keep my head as still as I can on contact. I guess I should just add one more final piece and say on this type of ball, I'm going to be going back, trying to aim deep cross court with spin. I'm just trying to neutralize or get back into neutral in the rally. There is zero chance that I'm going to be trying to hit down the line off this ball. It's just get back, get it done early, keep your head still, try and neutralize it and get back in the rally. Okay, so there are different footwork patterns for dealing with deep backhands. They can be a little bit tricky at first, getting used to the feeling of what you do with your hips and what you do with your upper body. But if you spend a little bit of time practicing it and working on it, you'll get the hang of it. And then these higher, deeper balls are actually going to start to be much easier for you. Obviously, if you're playing against Nadal, it's a different story. But for the people that we're probably playing against, once you've got the footwork down, it's going to get much, much easier. Now, like I said at the start, one of the key pieces to this is going to be the early recognition. So make sure you grab yourself that free Tennis Vision starter program. But also, if you would like more help in in this area. I work with tennis players doing brain-based training to help them get their bodies working better so they can play tennis at a higher level. There's a lot of stuff that goes into improving your tennis. You need to have the visual system functioning, but obviously here we're talking about some pretty advanced timing as well. So you've got to have the movement, you've got to have the coordination, and those are all things that you can really improve with brain-based training. So if you're interested in potentially working with me, there's another link in the description that will allow you to schedule a free chat. I can learn more about your game and we can go from there.